Well, from three waters to farming emissions, rural New Zealand is pushing back against big government reforms.
New Minister Kieran McAnulty is the man tasked with turning that around. He's met with 54 rural and provincial councils, but can he deliver the policy change they want?
He sat down in Parliament with senior reporter Connor Witten, who asked what he's doing to win them back.
Well, I mean, I'm a product of rural New Zealand. Both sides of my family are from Ekatahuna, and they have been for generations. I care very deeply about rural New Zealand, although I accept that some people don't believe me sometimes, but I do, very much. And ultimately, if you look at what is driving the reforms, it is about the long-term sustainability of our rural communities. In essence, the issue with Three Waters is that our rural councils can't afford to do the water work they need to by themselves, and they say that themselves. And ultimately, He Waka Eke Nawa was a proposal that came forward from the sector itself, and we're going out on consultation on two areas where there's a difference of opinion. But the whole point of that is to make sure that we have a sustainable farming sector moving forward.
Sure, but you need to bring them with you. That's why you've been out to virtually every rural and provincial council across New Zealand. What's the feedback you got there? What are the issues they brought up with you?
The reason I did it first and foremost is for twofold. One, I was 4 years behind other ministers in building relationships. I knew that straight away. And two, I wanted to get my head around the portfolio as quick as possible. And in areas where I'm from, if you want to introduce yourself, you do it face to face. And honestly, it was the best thing I did. So 54 councils with no agenda, no set message. I made that clear right from the get-go. I'm here to listen to them on whatever they want to talk about.
And that went down well with the councils. We've spoken to some of the mayors that you met with. They tell us that you were genuine. They tell us that you were listening. But they're worried that there's a disconnect at the cabinet level. So you've taken in all of that feedback. You've passed it on. Is the leadership listening?
I think so. I mean, we can point to a couple of things that have come out of it already. So it was after 21 councils, if my memory serves me right, that we were leading into the Local Government New Zealand Conference in Palmerston North. By that stage, I got a pretty clear feel that there was a lot of reform happening in the sector, and that was putting strain on their workforce, and so they wanted a bit of help with that. So at the conference, we were able to announce $44 million to help councils attract and retain staff. That came out directly from the feedback I was hearing. We've set up a ministerial oversight group just focused on local government reform. That's come out of as a result of the tour. And just last week I announced $10 million to help those rural water suppliers that aren't affected by the Three Waters proposals to help them meet the standards. Again, a direct result of the feedback I heard.
Okay, but let's take an issue like water reform. One mayor told us our community sees Three Waters as a swear word. That can't proceed in its current form, can it?
Well, Three Waters has been used as a label for water reform in general. If you broke that up, I think you'd get two answers. One, is water reform needed? The answer would be yes. Do you like the government's Three Waters proposal? Well, I got a mixed response with that one.
But a mixed response, I mean, 66 mayors were elected in October, 9 support Three Waters, 43 are opposed. So you haven't brought the country with you on this. Are you open to changing that?
Well, the Prime Minister said so herself, and so they pointed to the select committee process, and changes have come out or recommended from that. And the Prime Minister and the Minister have said that they're going to look at those.
What kind of changes?
Well, ultimately, I think it boils down to a concern about a disconnect or a potential disconnect between local communities and the entities. That was certainly a common thing. And the weight in which they placed on that varied between councils, but that was certainly a common theme, and I've fed that back.
So will councils have more say in how these water assets are managed?
Well, as you know, it's not my portfolio, so I can't really comment specifically, but I had a specific role that I pretty much gave myself, is to go out, listen to these communities and feed that back, and I've done that. I've made it clear that these communities need reassurance that their needs will be met by these entities. And if that hasn't been made clear, then we've got to make it clear. We've got to spell it out.
Is it also your role to try to convince your cabinet colleagues who do hold the power here, you're outside of cabinet, is it your role to convince them to listen to rural New Zealand?
Well, I certainly want to provide that rural provincial perspective, but I don't accept that a rural provincial perspective is at odds with the Labor government. Part of the reason I put my hand up to be a Labor MP was because I genuinely believe it's the party for rural New Zealand. But in this instance, it's clear that there is a disconnect between the objectives of local government and what the government has put forward. But I don't think that that's not insurmountable. I think that we can find a way forward here, particularly if you recognise that of the 54 councils I visited, none of them said they can do this by themselves, and they all agree that something has to be done. That's a pretty positive start.
I want to know what you think of the state of that relationship, though. I mean, farmers are telling us that they feel like that they are the enemy. Councils are telling us they feel like they can't be trusted. You are a rural guy. You're from the Wairarapa. Do you think that relationship is broken beyond repair?
No, I don't. And I can proudly say that this government has done significant amounts for the rural sector. But if you just take agriculture, I know that we get labelled as, that we hate the sector or we don't care about rural New Zealand. It doesn't stack up. If we didn't care about rural New Zealand, we wouldn't have embarked on a world first plan to get rid of Mycoplasma bovis, hundreds of millions of dollars to achieve that, and we're on the verge of doing it. No other country's done that. If we didn't care about the sector, we wouldn't have done it. We would have just accepted the fact that every other trading nation that we've got has Mycoplasma bovis, so all we're doing now is being just like the rest of the world. We didn't. We said, no, we can do this, and we backed the sector to do it.
I want to talk about your role as racing minister now. You've given the greyhound industry an ultimatum. They need to improve animal welfare or they could be shut down. How much progress have you seen?
Oh, there is some progress, not as much as I'd like, but they were put on notice roughly 17 months ago. I'm expecting the final report from the Racing Integrity Board in a matter of weeks. And the decision, well, ultimately the recommendation that I put to Cabinet will be heavily influenced by that report.
Could the greyhound racing industry still be shut down?
Yes, it could. It is an option, and there's really two options. The status quo is just not going to be acceptable to New Zealanders, I don't believe. And I don't believe the status quo is going to be acceptable for many of the participants within the greyhound industry either.
Because the status quo it's alarming, right? We've seen instances of animal abuse, we've seen extensive injuries, we've seen greyhounds being given methamphetamine. Do you think there is a future for that industry here?
There could be. I'm not going to preempt any decisions here. This is a genuine process. They've been given 18 months, and it would only be fair that we let them see that 18 months out. But when I see that report, I'll be looking at it really carefully. This is a massive call. Banning any industry is a massive call, and I really feel sorry for the good, decent people that are participating in this, who are going to potentially be let down by the actions or indeed inaction of some of the players in the industry. But I'm a massive racing fan, hugely passionate about it, but ultimately no sport that uses animals can operate without a social licence, and greyhounds are at risk of losing that. They have to show that, one, they recognise that as it currently stands, it's not sustainable. They need to clearly outline what their plans are and what they're going to do to fix it, and that when they get there, that greyhound racing can operate in a way that meets their social licence.
I want to go back to local government for a moment. It is losing its relevance. That's clear. Turnout is going down every single year. We saw that at last month's elections. What needs to happen to turn that around?
Well, local government will always have a significant role in our communities, but we also need to be able to work with them as both central and local government to be able to show people how important it is, because it's crucially important to the communities.
Civics education, is that the answer?
Personally, I'm a massive fan of that. I think that...
that was a Labor policy in 2017, though. Shouldn't there be better civics education by now?
Well, I remain a fan. I can't speak to the priorities of the Education Minister. I mean, they've been done a lot of stuff in the last couple of years, and obviously you've got to work through the priorities list. But I hope to see that come in, because we need everyone in the country to understand how important democracy is for us. We've seen what happens when people lose faith in democracy, and it's got some pretty severe results around the world. We don't want to go down that track.